Nigerians have been reacting in diverse ways to President Bola Tinubu's performance in handling the affairs of the nation after his first year in office. It has been an extended conversation covering several sectors of the political economy, including oil and gas, aviation, agriculture, infrastructure development, and a whole other lot. But for those who are looking forward to when the immediate realities of Nigeria improve, the major concern has been around the issue of restructuring, which the president appears to be invested in, based on his express support for the idea of national re-engineering. Well, our next guest is Dr. Nnaemeka Obiaraeri, an investment banking executive and policy analyst. He's here to help us get a better understanding of the president's overtures on the issue of restructuring. It's good to see you again on the morning show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. Now, if we're talking about restructuring, I would like to ask if you think President Bola Tinubu is the president who would help us finally get the restructuring that we've been speaking about. And I would like you to differentiate restructuring when it comes to resource allocation, let's say it's Zamfara State controlling their own gold, versus restructuring when it comes to self-determination and governance when it comes to state police and other issues like that.
Okay, I don't think President Bola Tinubu lacks the courage take audacious steps. If it's on record that he's able to put this through, it will catapult him to the levels of the likes of Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, and Nnamdi Azikiwe. And I will tell you why I believe so. Remember, for the past 24 years, we've been struggling with the issue of removal of subsidy. He removed subsidy despite the fact that the removal of subsidy was not properly planned. It was an audacious step. Restructuring is the best thing that will happen to this country. And if that is the only thing that Bola Tinubu achieves in his first 4 years in office, his name will remain indelible in the history of Nigeria. And I will explain to you why. The golden era of Nigeria was the years between 1960 to 1966. The 1960-1963 constitutional framework of Nigeria was the only constitutional arrangement that we have freely entered into by the people of Nigeria. Before independence in 1960, our forebearers, Abafemi Awolowo, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Tafawa Balewa, Herbert Macaulay, Anthony Nahoro, they had summits, they had conferences. The indigenous people, they had meetings, and they agreed on a constitutional and physical framework that recognizes our diverse cultures and differences, and with intention to help us harness our large population and the natural endowments that God had given Nigeria. It was a productive-based economy that had physical and governance valves, provisions that recognized these differences. We had resource control. The physical arrangement was such that the regions were semi-autonomous and they were the federating unit. Each region controlled 50% of every revenue that was generated within their domain. 30% was paid to the central port and 20% to the federal government. The exclusive list then was limited to just provision of external security and the foreign affairs. And that was why we had the granite pyramid of the north, the textile, the cotton and everything. In the old western Nigeria, we had the cocoa, massive cocoa fields and processes. In the old eastern Nigeria, we had the palm oil, we had the coal and the limestone. In fact, in 1965, it's on record, Nigeria controlled 45% of the global crude palm oil value chain supply. Today, that market is valued at over 72 billion, with Indonesia and Malaysia controlling 85% of the global market. And it's on record that these guys came to Nigeria over a century ago to pick the seedlings from the wild and modified it in their nations. If Nigeria had controlled and maintained that trajectory, today we would have been exporting nothing less than $38 billion worth of crude palm oil resources. But we abandoned everything with the discovery of the crude oil at Olobri. Restructuring Nigeria should not just be a mantra or a political stunt. I know he can do it. And it is for the interest of every of the federating units in Nigeria. Let me tell you what we don't understand. The north of Nigeria is actually the paradise that most of us do not really realize. When Bible talks about land flowing with milk and honey, it was talking about the date fruits, it's talking about dairy products. And interestingly, the north of Nigeria is the only place in the whole wide world where the date grows and fruits twice in a year, naturally. Saudi Arabia, as wealthy as they are, in 2006, embarked an audacious plan as part of the measures to create oases of wealth and the curb incursion of desert. They started palm plantation development. As of today, they produce over $2 billion worth of it. Egypt is 95% desert. Yet they embarked upon the same arrangement. We developed a working paper that we could have we gave to northern governors without even the presidency intervention. If they not decide today, they want to just, with a cluster of 2 million hectares of land, they can generate $109 billion worth of revenue from the agro-value chain annually, and which is bigger than they can ever imagine getting from the crude oil allocations from Niger Delta region. Interestingly, look at Netherlands. A land mass of 41,000 square kilometers, 2 million hectares of arable land mass. In fact, Netherlands had to do a 1,480-kilometer wall to prevent ocean from carrying over their cities. Yet, last year, they did over 124 billion euro of agro products. They did 12 billion from dairy and egg, 11 billion from vegetables. They even did 10 billion from beef. Do you know that if we do the arrangement that we had to do, if we allow restructuring to happen, with the same framework, that the only thing we will introduce to the 1963 constitution is to allow a single term of office for governors and presidency, 6 years single term, and to make a provision for rotational presidency in such a way that presidency and the governorship will rotate among regions and zones to put a safety valve against agitation that people are being marginalized. If we do this, adopt whole line and sink the 1963 constitutional framework, with a proviso of single term in office for the presidency and the governors, and 5 term in office for the legislators, 2 terms maximum. I give it to you. In 10 years' time, Nigeria will be among the top 7 biggest economy in the whole world.
All right. Well, it's been a year since the president assumed office. I mean, there's been a lot of distractions, especially as it has to do with, the reintroduction of the national anthem, and Labour's push for a new minimum wage. I'd like for you to analyze, I'd like for you to analyze how he's fared in the past 1 year. And also, you said that Tinubu is a strong proponent for restructuring Nigeria, but he's come under heavy criticism for having the largest cabinet in the history of any Nigerian president, especially, with the unprecedented number of ministerial appointments. Does this point to the direction of restructuring?
Okay, let me address the issue of labor. I've maintained that the labor union and the labor operators in Nigeria are not victims. They are the part of the major and larger problems of Nigeria. They are in the same bed with the politicians and the political office holders. For the labor to be demanding for minimum wage of 650,000 naira a month is very unreasonable. It does not rank with common sense. Scientifically, how did we even get to this position? In 2011, when Jonathan moved the needle to 18,000 naira, the exchange rate then put minimum wage to be at about $116 per month. In 2008, when Buhari moved it up to 30,000 naira, based on the exchange rate then, it was $83 per month. Scientifically, for any reasonable person, both on the side of the government and on the side of the labor union, if we are to be very honest and sincere, it is the only way scientifically, if you want to derive the right and appropriate minimum wage, it's simple. $116 plus $83, $99.50 divided by 2, which will come to about 120,000 naira based on the current exchange rate. That should be the appropriate and scientifically derived minimum wage if the labor unions are sincere and government are sincere. But for us to pay labor 120,000 naira, we must be very productive. If you look at the GDP per capita of Nigeria, look at South Africa. Minimum wage in South Africa is about $320,000. And they merited it because, one, GDP per capita in South Africa is $6,670. And which, even if you convert it to naira based on the current exchange rate, the South African workers actually, by earning 330 naira a month, they're actually earning half of what they are even entitled to. If you look at GDP per capita in Nigeria, it's about $1,150. Naira equivalent. And in fact, if I am to be in a position of power and authority, there is no public servant from the presidency to the civil servant that should earn anything more than the GDP per capita of Nigeria. And that will be the only way you can support them to be productive. Labor can only demand, if Nigeria is an enterprise and things are the way it is today, by now half of the labor union will have been laid off. If I run a company and the company is running and the company is not producing well, and my employees are not pulling their weight, the first thing I will do is to restructure and rationalize. And that is, by the way. Then on the issue of the over-bloated structure of the cabinet of President Tinubu. You know, like I've always said, it is not easy to govern in Nigeria. Most of them, APC is noted to be playing politics. They love to play politics. And I think he overbloated the structure to accommodate all manner of human beings. I say it to you, and I say it, I repeat it here. Only about 20% of those in the cabinet of Tinubu are adding value to him. 80% of them should have been there in the first instance. Good as it.
Are you referring to ministers or just everybody
I am
around the
referring
president?
to ministers, aides. In fact, out of the 1,300 MDAs in Nigeria, 80% of most of them, they are not pulling their weight. I'll give you an example. We have a minister for agriculture. We don't even know what he's doing. He came up with this idea of importing 10,000 tractors at a value of $1.80 billion. Average of $108,000 for a 75 horsepower tractor and its accessories. Go on YouTube, go on Google. Even as a private individual, I have relationship with Chinese tractor manufacturers who are even willing to set up assembly plants in Nigeria if we can do 10,000 tractors. And they are willing to bring the same tractors into Nigeria for $24,000, including cost of clearing and shipping. And here in Nigeria, somebody audaciously and boldly is planning to import 10,000 tractors and accessories for a whooping $1.80 billion and even signed a MOU, and nobody sacked him. If it's a private company, he will have been fired. You know, it's not good enough. See, we need to start governing and stop playing politics. And I want to encourage him. Let us all encourage him. Anybody who truly loves Nigeria must encourage President Bola Tinubu to go all the hog. Remember, from 1999, he was the first governor to create his own local government areas, and was his right. He was at the forefront of calling for resource control, for fiscal federalism, for serving national conference. I here say to you, Mr. President, if this is the only thing you achieve in your term, restructure Nigeria back to the 1963 constitutional framework of Nigeria, to turn this country back into a productive economy, reform the electoral laws, reform everything we need to reform in Nigeria. If that's the only thing you do, Mr. President, I say to you, generations unborn will remember you the way they fondly remember Ahmadu Bello, the way they fondly remember Obafemi Awolowo, the way they fondly remember Dr. Michael Okpara. Do it and receive the glories.
All right, Dr. Obiaraeri, just a quick one. I know that my colleague Sheyiton was, is eager to ask you an interesting question, but just very quickly, because you've focused a lot on the idea of restructuring. There's a cheeky post going around on social media by way of justification, an article by way of justification for the change of the national anthem from the new that has now become the old to the old that is now the new anthem. And part of what that article is trying to say is that maybe President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has tactically commenced the process of restructuring. My suspicion is that because the call for a change of anthem to the old one was contained in the 2014 confab. So people are thinking that maybe, perchance, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the president, can begin the process of looking into that important document that came out of the confab in 2014. You've made a specific suggestion that the 1963 Constitution will be the plank upon which the restructuring should stand. But I would like to know what your thoughts are regarding what the confab document contains, and if you think that that will have a place, that can be merged with what the 1963 Constitution represented and the sort of restructuring that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu should begin to think away.
The recommendations and reports of the 2014 confab conference that was held in Nigeria was the nearest that we got into realizing a constitution for the people, by the people, of the people. But of course, for whatever reason, Goodluck Jonathan could not push through because he was busy and focused on realizing a second term in office. And that is what Bola Tinubu should avoid. He should not play to the gallery. He should not allow himself to be distracted. Of course, changing the national anthem, whether you change the national anthem to the old one or to the new one, if the physical realities of Nigerians do not, make sense or get back to what we used to have in the olden days, it does not make sense. National anthem does not put food on the table. National anthem does not provide security. Remember, between 60 to 1966, I was sharing with somebody. I said, go and look at the foreign exchange stability within that first 6 years. the Nigerian pounds was stronger than the UK pounds and the US dollars. In fact, 65 pence was equivalent to US dollar, and it was consistently stable for 6 years. It never shifted because we had a productive economy, and it's a very simple law of demand and supply. We had a regional security arrangement that allowed the regions to control their own security. Let me tell you, an incident happened in the early 60s. There was problem in Congo Democratic Republic, if I can remember, one of the Central African republics in Africa. And they were requesting for security agents to go and make peace. They didn't take the federal police. They requested for the police of the old Eastern Nigeria because they were reputed to be more disciplined and more professional. And there was nothing like kidnapping, banditry, unknown gunmen, and the kind of madness we have today in Nigeria. Because security is best administered by the people. So I think no matter whatever anybody may insinuate, Bola Tinubu should at least, please, not rest on his horse until this is achieved. And for those who are already playing politics with it, I feel so sorry. Now, I heard some elements in North saying, oh, we don't want to restructure, that Tinubu wants to destroy the North. Buhari was president for 8 years. Before Buhari became president, the Northwest and the South of Nigeria were the safest regions in Nigeria. After 8 years of Buhari presidency and squandering $28 billion in security expenses, the Northwest had become worse than the Northeast in terms of insecurity. Katsina State, where he hails from, is the headquarters of poverty, headquarters of illiteracy, headquarters of child and maternal mortality rates, headquarters of everything you can think about in terms of impoverishing people. But he was president for 8 years. The only thing he achieved was to do a helipad for himself and to do a highway to Maradi, to nowhere. And that is the truth. Having the presidency and having power, that does not impact on the people. It's not what people should be. Anybody in Nigeria today who stands up to oppose Tinubu's desire, sincerely, if he's sincere, to restructure Nigeria back to the 1963 constitutional framework or even the 2014 confab recommendations. But with these two provisions, I saw where they were talking about 6 terms, 6 years term with 2 terms in office. No, single term, 6 years for the governors and for the presidency, rotated among the regions and rotated among the zones. And then for the National Assembly and the state assemblies, 5-year term in office, 2 terms. Nobody should stay more than 2 terms. Do you know why we do it this way? So that the time of the presidency and governor will overlap the of the legislators, so that no presidency or governor will be able to control the legislators who will be longer in office than them. If we do this sincerely, my brother, I tell you, this country, it will shock you. Remember that before the advent, between 1960, go and check the records, Nigeria was ahead of China. Nigeria was ahead of Indonesia. Nigeria was far ahead of Singapore. As of 1965, Singapore was thrown out of mainland Malaysia because they were regarded as a pariah state. No value to add. They even import sand. Today, these nations are ahead of Nigeria. I looked at the GDP per capita in 1980. GDP per capita of Nigeria was far ahead of South Korea. Today, South Koreans, 28 million people, have GDP of $1.6 trillion. Nigeria, a country of 217 million multi-talented people, we are struggling with the likes of Yemen, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. God help us. We have everything it takes to be among the top 7 biggest economies in the whole world. We have the manpower, we have the natural endowment, and we have the God-given resources. All we need is the right leadership. And the right leadership can only come when we restructure Nigeria in such a way that the incompetent men who latches on our ethnic and religious differences to perpetuate their criminality and wickedness will not have no hiding place to hide.
All right then. So if to tackle the back-breaking national burdens, there are indications that this, the 36 states of the country will be saddled with more responsibilities if we go in this route. I wonder what your sense of, public perception regarding this need for restructuring is. Are there particular regions or demographics that are more supportive or resistant? And if we look at the implementation roadmap as a whole, if restructuring were to be implemented, what would an ideal roadmap look like, the key steps and the milestones that need to be achieved?
Quickly, like I said, dust up the 1963 constitutional framework with little amendment. Let me tell you why rotational presidency is very important. And why one single term in office of 6 years is also more important. One of the problems we've had is that most governors and presidents before now have always after the first 1 year, now start planning for second term in office. And therefore, with that blindness to go back to power, they now start making mistakes. By doing, let me tell you what will happen. Rotational, if we had rotational presidency in Nigeria in 2015, there's no way a Muhammadu Buhari will have been made president of Nigeria by whatever means and indices. Those who supported Buhari in 2015 knew very, very well that he lacked the competencies, that he was the worst person to govern Nigeria. But they did it because they knew he had 12 million votes. 12 million votes of illiterate Talakawas that they refused to train. And it was based on that 12 million vote that they all closed their eyes and thumbed their nose and elected him president. And he took Nigeria 50 years back. If you have rotational presidency in Nigeria, for example now, after Tinubu's 6 years, I even wanted to start with him, amend it to take immediate effect. After 6 years, assuming it goes to the Northeast, there's no way anybody from the Northeast will now come and give us the worst of them all to be president of Nigeria, because you're not going to latch on ethnicity. Most of them are practically homogeneous. You're not going to latch on religion. All the parties will do is to nominate the best candidates from the Northeast, and the whole of Nigerians will vet them and vote the party with the best candidates.
Sorry, sir, did you say that the Northeast is practically homogeneous?
No, most of the Northeast, of course, I know there are a lot of tribes there, religion, like Taraba, Adamawa have some huge population of Christians there, and they also have some tribes. But I can tell you this, parties will look at the competencies and capacities of those people that are contesting to elect them. For example, if Nigeria had regional presidency in 2014 and you zoned it to the Northwest, there's no way anybody. You saw what Yar'Adua did in 2007. Yar'Adua floored Buhari in 2007 because there was no need for anybody to come and play games. Both of them were from Katsina State. Both of them were Muslims. And Yar'Adua was a more honest person because Yar'Adua was the only governor, apart from P2B, that saved money. Yar'Adua was the only president in the history of Nigeria that publicly declared his asset and that of Torai, his wife, publicly. So Nigerians knew that Yar'Adua was more honest than him, and he couldn't play on religious sentiments. And Yar'Adua gapped him by miles. So the truth is, if we restructure Nigeria the way, an honest way, not playing politics, I tell you of a truth. This, and the roadmap should be immediate. They can actually amend this thing within 3 months. Make it effective immediately.
Like they did with the anthem?
Yes. Tinubu should do 6 years. Single term. Let it go to Northeast. After Northeast, back to Southeast. There are the two regions that have not tested the president. You enshrine it in the Constitution. If after 2 cycles, we can go back and say, okay, we've tested it, it has worked. But I can tell you what will happen. If you introduce it and then the physical provisions, resource control, let me tell you what will happen. Zamfara State is suffering from insecurity because people are mining their goats illegally. And most of these governors are lazy. I can give you in 3 minutes what I can do as a governor of a state in North that can get nothing less than $20 billion into my state without breaking sweat. And these guys know it, but you know why they will not do it? They will not do it because some of them lack the cerebral capacity, they lack the patience, they lack the patriotism, they lack the sincerity. It is easier for them to award road contracts and inflate the prices at 300% and then steal 200% and use 100% to do shabby road that will be spoiled in 2 months. That is the truth. But if we put resource control in place the way we used to have it in the early 60s, I tell you what will happen. Zamfara people will sit down and say, hey, if we don't go to work and protect our gold, we will all die of hunger. The people of the old Western Nigeria, do you know that the tallest building in Ibadan was built with cocoa proceeds? Today, a ton of cocoa is selling for $10,400. If the Southwest decide to do 2 million hectares of cocoa, 100 hectares in every electoral ward in the Southeast, in the Southwest, with the hybrid cocoa that is produced by the Cocoa Research Institute in Ibadan, in the next 5 years, the Southwest of Nigeria will produce nothing less than $20 billion worth of cocoa value chain, from cocoa powder to cocoa milk to cocoa butter and everything. But the problem is that the governors will not sit down to do what Awolowo did. Because they are all waiting for the trade coast from the Niger Delta region. The Niger Delta people will protect their oil and gas assets because they know if they allow it to be stolen, they are on their own.
Okay, sir. So you spoke about the Niger Delta region protecting the oil and gas, and you've spoken about resource allocation and the different resources in the different regions. But you also said something interesting. You spoke about the intellectual capacity of the leadership. Now, beyond talking about the governor, since we're talking about the federal government and Tinubu's 1 year in office, something that a lot of people have been speaking about is the ministers. Now, we have the largest cabinet we've ever had in our history as a democracy. Which ministers are you thinking that their scorecard does not quite add up? You spoke earlier about the Minister of Agriculture, but because there's over 40 to choose from. So are there ministers that you think have been put in position that they are not doing the correct job of? Or are there any that you're like, this is a shining light and this is more of what I want to see from the Tinubu administration?
I do not and will not romance mediocrity. So I won't discuss the failures. I will point out the very few that have done well. Olabunmi Tunji Ojo has done well as Interior Affairs Minister. Bosun, the ICT guy, has done so well. Yemi Cardoso is doing his best at the CBN. I tell everybody, let me tell you. In fact, I did an article and I said, if those on the physical side do not wake up, Yemi Cardoso should raise the MPI to 30% in next MPC. And that's the only way he can attract FPI into Nigeria. The oil and gas industry is where we have the worst set of human beings over the last 9 years. I'm even shocked that Bola Tinubu inherited the rot that Buhari left behind for him, and he didn't clear the stable. Before Buhari became president, we were producing 2.4 million barrels of crude every day. And do you know that there was a time in 2010 that we were doing 2.8 million barrels a day? Go and check the records. It's like, visit CBN website, you will see it there. It's clearly stated there. Do you know why it was easy for Jonathan and for Yar'Adua and for Obasanjo to be able to defend the Naira? They had huge dollar inflows coming in. There was a time we received $103 billion, $98 billion. Today, Tinubu is grappling with the criminality and corruption. And I'm even shocked, an oil and gas person, that he did not do a massive clearance at NNPC. He didn't do a massive clearance at NNDPRA. He left those elements that Buhari left behind for him. The oil and gas industry is the weakest link in Nigeria. And until Tinubu takes urgent step to clear the whole mass of human beings at the leadership position of that place, Nigeria will continue to crawl, not even walk. So, like I pointed out, Bosun is doing well, Olabunmi Ojo is doing well, Yemi Cardoso is trying. In fact, the guy is using machete to clear thick forest, and that is the truth. The other ones within that cabinet, I can tell you, they are not pulling their. If you have to score them, I will score them 2 over 10.
There are 48 ministers. You've only endorsed 2.
Only 2.
Okay, that's an interesting one. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Obiaraeri, for spending time with us this morning. As always, your insights. It's been a very insightful conversation.